Let me just briefly introduce the rest of our panel. So on my far right is Dr. Michelle Goddard, the Legal Services Consumer, a member, I should say, of the Legal Services Consumer Panel. Michelle is a member of that panel and also Director of Policy and Standards at the Market Research Society. Next to Michelle is Matthew Briggs from the Law Superstore. Now, many of you will be aware of exactly who the Law Superstore is, or what it is. It's the UK's only real-time legal services comparison and aggregation website. And then the last member of our panel is David Willis, who is an SRA board member. So, I'm going to take some questions from the floor. Who would like to get the ball rolling on this? Okay, yeah, I have a question. Gentleman sitting on the left there.
Thank you. Brian Rogers from Reliance. I'd be interested to know what context the SRA is looking to put these complaints in. Bearing in mind a lot of firms are trying to avoid things going to the LEO at the moment to incur their £400 case fee. A lot of people are actually making commercial decisions. And one of the issues with the LEO is that there's no actual context to a lot of the complaints that go there. So what is the SRA going to be doing in terms of that context, or have you not made up your minds yet?
Yeah. Well, that's one for you initially, Jane, I think.
So it's a good question, and I think that making the context meaningful around complaints handling is something that a whole variety of other sectors and professions have really tussled with over the years. And you can see, for example, how the FCA has changed its practice in this area. So it now publishes basic information, but only in terms of organisations it regulates that receives, for example, more than 500 complaints in any sort of 6-month period. So I think there's quite a lot of thinking to be done around this, and you're absolutely right. This is a discussion paper. We're asking the questions. We're not putting forward a view on that. We're just talking about some of the options.
Okay, let's go around the panel. Let's get some thoughts on context, the appropriate context. Michelle.
Well, I think to underlie the fundamentals, which is that this is an important aspect of data for consumers to make a choice. We speak a lot about, consumers empowering the market. They need more information. What do they care about? Price and reputation. And the kind of quality aspect of it is critical for them. So yes, we understand and accept that it does need context. And I think in terms of informing it, you look to other sectors. So in terms of comparing like with like, we think about it in terms of proportion of complaints, in terms of, the firm, the kind of sector that you work in, or specialism. Is there a difference? And that needs to be brought out. So I think there's an ongoing discussion there, but I think the important point is that it needs to be provided, but in a meaningful manner for consumers.
Matthew, let me ask you, what should it be? Should this be just everything? Should this be every complaint? Should it be, entire profile of an insurance, PII history kind of thing? Do we put everything out there so the consumer is informed about every tiny
Well, I think from our perspective, we've got some really interesting insight that we're now seeing from consumers. So we launched the Law Superstore 3 months ago in August of this year. We get about 10,000 unique visitors a week to the site, and we know what they are using to select and choose their legal service provider. We didn't when we started this journey 3 years ago. We're now starting to understand that intelligence and that insight, and we're building those user selection criteria and understanding those learnings. I think from us, we don't currently contain on our site complaints data and negligence claims. We don't have any of that information on. What we do have is information in which we believe consumers find important to select a provider, and that is around price. So, there's no point shying away from it. So 92% of people on our site, the first thing they look for in terms of prioritising how the law firms appear is on price. They don't necessarily choose that as their number one buying criteria, but 92% are looking at price. Interest on our site, only 4% choose the top law firm when the comparison table is served up, because they don't necessarily believe the top one. But we allow the consumer to search across about 40 different criteria: price, location, client reviews, disabled parking, foreign languages, accreditations. And interestingly, some of the criteria we thought that would be really important is not being selected at all. So that's regulated versus non-regulated accreditations, etc. So Still early days for us, but we're gathering lots of learnings and lots of insight.
Okay. David, a thought on context?
Well, I think Jane's point that this, in sort of government terms, this is very much a very green paper. It's not full of recommendations that we're consulting on. So we are interested in getting this balance right. And there's a big difference for us, I think, between what we may, for example, oblige regulated firms to provide to us, what we then put on our own information that's available to the public, and what we provide in a digital form that comparator websites can use. And, you know, we may well decide that there's information on complaints which is appropriate for us to have to sort of aggregate to assess trends, but where you can't really explain the context in a way that makes it meaningful for individual consumer decisions. You know, I'm tempted to say to everyone that my initial reaction is you should only be putting out information about upheld complaints.
Yeah.
But, and I may be wrong on that. This is a green paper.
Well, why don't we take the opportunity to ask? Who thinks? That information on complaints is going to be made available to the public, should it simply be upheld complaints? Show of hands? Yeah, I think we've probably got a majority there. Okay. All right, let's have another question, please. The lady sitting there in the striped top, or striped dress. I don't know if we can get a microphone. She's... Okay.
Because my concern would be you're going to drive people, as Culp internally, I'm going to drive people underground rather than the benefit of what my consumer as a city firm client wants or is interested in receiving from this.
Okay. I think, okay, so basic question you're asking is there going to be a distinction in terms of city firms and other firms in terms of the information?
In the context that the consumer is different.
Yeah, obviously the consumer is different. Okay, good question. Different information perhaps for different types of firm, size of firm and so forth?
Shall I kick off on that? I mean, actually the opportunity is there to make the case if you think there should be an exclusion. I mean, it's clear, I think, that the information asymmetry that drives a lot of this doesn't really exist when you get to large corporate clients, particularly large corporate clients that have their own in-house legal department. There was a slightly different topic, but a very interesting piece of research that the SRA sponsored a few months ago, which was looking at the risks for the profession arising from that, the power, if you like, of the client to require you to stop acting independently is a very real risk now. So I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting thing being on the board of the SRA. These issues come up all the time. You know, you could argue that the people you should exempt are the very small firms because the regulatory burden is just going to be disproportionate. On the other hand, if you were a consumer out there, actually the consumers from the very large commercial firms will not use this information, do not need it, and will get their, you know, they make their purchasing decisions in a very different way.
Okay. All right, Jen, I'm going to leave you out of this one because we've had an SRA voice on it. Let's have Matthew on this and then Michelle.
I mean, firstly, our platform talks to the regular consumer and the small business owner.
Not really the person who's looking at the big city firm.
No, having said that, I was speaking at a conference, an insurance conference, in the same audience as Go Compare, Money Supermarket, and a participant in the audience said, oh, so I could use your platform to select lawyers to help me defend against personal injury claims. She worked for an insurance company. And she has a panel of defendant lawyers, and it was an avenue I'd never considered before, but to use it almost as a directory, the thing that really appealed to her was the fact she could actually check the pricing that those lawyers were going to charge for that defendant service.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is obviously which is quite different. But for us, you know, and the platform that we've built, we spent a lot of time researching, and I sort of alluded to it before, we spent a lot of time researching what we believe are important selection criteria, what really makes a difference for consumers buying legal services. There is a misconception out there in terms of what legal services cost. Recent research we did, consumers think legal services are about twice as expensive as they actually are. So we've now got pricing information on what legal services are being sold for. The perception in the market is that it actually costs them double. And that sort of underpins and fuels this latency this hesitation for people engaging with lawyers. And we want to bring that transparency, and we are bringing that transparency.
Can I just jump in? I'll come to Michelle in a sec, just with a quick question. How attracted are consumers to fixed pricing? Does that figure a lot in your website?
So there are 5 pricing models that the law firm can choose from on our platform. Fixed price, capped, hourly rate, no win, no fee, and to be confirmed. To be confirmed is pretty poor, it's got to be said, gives no transparency. However, we did put it on as a result of requests from law firms. 83% of the services that are being purchased on our site are fixed fees.
Okay. People love fixed fees.
Absolutely.
They want to know what they're in for.
Certainty.
Okay. Michelle.
Could I just pick up on that point?
Yeah,
because
please.
that is, I mean, something that the panel has spoken about a lot, done a lot of research on. And fixed fees is certainly consumer preference. It provides them greater clarity as to what they're getting into. We've had research about the fact that they think services are expensive. Having a kind of clear figure up front enables them to control what it is that they, the transaction and their payment. So that has to be the optimum solution. And the panel understands and accepts not all areas of law are the same. And some are more complex, there are variations, so fixed fees may not apply across the board. But certainly in terms of the attractiveness for consumers and making the market more transparent and making it work better, fixed fees has to be the optimum solution.
Okay. And we take it to a different level of transparency in terms of that fixed fee actually applies to a specific scope of work, so the consumer can see what they're getting for their £300. Yeah. The law firm has also signed up to the exact same scope of work, so there's complete alignment.
Okay. Sorry, that was a sidetrack by me. I just wanted to know.
Into price.
Thanks for answering that.
Go back.
Michelle, a quick thought from you on horses for courses. Should all firms, whatever size, have to put the same information, provide the same information for the consumer, or should it differ?
Well, I think that's something that needs to be kind of worked through, obviously. Naturally, in terms of a consumer panel, our focus is with individual consumers and with small businesses and their ability to access services, so that one could make an argument in terms of exempting corporate clients from some information requirements, because the information symmetry is different. But on the other hand, in terms of exempting smaller firms from providing information, even though I can understand there's an argument in terms of the regulatory burden, I think it's important to underscore that this is who individual consumers tend to go to. So that whereas one could think about reducing, say, the frequency of reporting and address it in that way, seeking to exempt smaller firms from providing this data, I think is going in the wrong direction.
Okay, so no exemption for small firms. Yes, the lady in the front row.
I have to say, sorry, Linda Lee. I have to say I'm so shocked that I'm almost rendered speechless, but not quite.
Get your question out first, then render yourself speechless.
First of all, I would say that the basic premise is wrong. If you look at the information about client unmet need, it includes a large number of people who don't realise they have need. In that figure of unmet need. And this is running to a government agenda, and I'm not convinced that's the way a regulator, particularly of legal services, should be operating. Okay.
All right. Okay.
Could I finish what I wanted to say?
Sure.
There is also, the problem of all of this is that it distorts behaviour in all manner of ways. If you are going to have something, an offering to a consumer, it should put a consumer in exactly the same position I am as a lawyer, who might know those law firms, in choosing that particular person. And I'm not convinced that the sorts of things you are looking at, and insurance data, shocks me beyond belief. Why that should be out there, claims made, that has no relevance to what the consumer is actually looking for. They want the service that suits them at a price they can afford. If they come to me, I can say to them, this is what it will cost for your case, and that's my regulatory requirement. And I think the other thing is you will make it even harder for the, dare I say, the unlovely client to attract someone who's willing to take on the difficult, unlovely, low-paid case. And I've worked in areas where that is a real problem because you're just adding the burden.
All right, okay, quite a few points there, but let's, okay. Jen, I'm going to put those to you in turn. First of all, you are dancing to the government's tune, and that's not the right thing for the regulator to be doing. We're
a regulator who regulates in the public interest. We do think there is a huge amount of unmet need out there. There's an awful lot of evidence saying so. Even if you look at work done looking at the number of online searches, 2 million searches a week or a day looking at legal issues, I don't think that's all lawyers or even law students. Clearly there are people out there trying to find their way through the labyrinth of legal services to get the kind of answers that they're looking for. I think it's absolutely right that people should be able to get right information from the right provider. I think for all of us, actually trying to find services when you're shopping blind is a real challenge. I think most regulators recognise that and put information out there. In our sector, we're quite limited in that respect. But if you look across multiple other sectors, markets and professional areas in this country, you can readily find information. So I don't see this as dancing to a government agenda. I see this as actually providing good and proper information for people out there, as happens much more widely in the consumer market. Okay. All right. Let me ask, let me go to other members of the panel on the question of whether this is actually going to distort things. In fact, you know, putting this data up there is going to somehow have a distorting, a negative effect. I don't know, you know, someone's got a gripe against a certain law firm, you know, they can load up complaints or whatever it might be, but there's a way of just distorting this in a way that is unfair.
If I could come in there, I suppose, 2 points. Currently, the consumer is blind. And we're operating in a very uneven situation. I mean, it's a kind of fundamental principle. Greater transparency is going to drive the competition and bring prices down. So I think the basic premise has to be correct. It applies across other sectors. What exempts the legal sector from this? So we kind of move forward with that. In terms of the consumer feedback mechanisms and whether they can distort the market, there are protections to be put in place. Comments can be moderated. You can kind of assess the validity of them. So I think the fact that a mechanism can be used negatively doesn't mean that you don't use it. You just put safeguards in place to make sure it's used appropriately. We had concerns at one point in terms of whether or not there was a trend with respect to legal services and sites, and comments being made by users then being taken down because lawyers perhaps threaten defamation claims with respect to that. And that's not, you know, what we want to ensure is that consumers can get information from different ways, be that consumer feedback, be that indicators objectively in terms of complaints data or other measures of quality, but that all the information needs to be out there for different sets of consumers to access in the way that they find appropriate. So I know I'm stepping away from your point somewhat, but I wanted to make the point as well that the accessibility of the information is important to consumers. So what the SRA is doing in terms of bringing it all together in one site, I think is important. But that we would like to see this widely across the kind of legal sector so that a consumer doesn't think about who's regulated, who's not regulated, what the title is, but has a legal problem, needs advice, goes to a central sector and can see all those indicators and make their choice accordingly. Okay. Matthew, I see you nodding.
Yeah, I mean,
in agreement to most of that. Anything to add?
I suppose I'm just struggling with the principle of a profession not wanting to be transparent. Just don't get it.
Okay. All right. Thrown back at you on that. So, is this a profession that doesn't want to be transparent? Let's have a show of hands. Who wants to be transparent? Okay, pretty much most people. All right. Okay, let's have another question. Where should we go? Yeah, gentleman in the second row here. Can we have a mic just down to the...
It's a question about aggregating websites.
Sorry.
Aggregating websites.
I can't even see that. Sorry, I can't even see. I did select the gentleman down here, but we'll come to you immediately after that. Oh, no, he's being generous and saying let you go first, so please carry on.
I'm grateful in giving way. I mean, in terms of aggregation websites, somebody pays. Now, I understand in the insurance sector, the insurers pay. Who would be paying for these websites, and would the SRA get good value for money for the data they give them?
Yeah, okay. Who pays for the websites? Jane, let me briefly, you first.
So we don't run comparison websites, but we believe in transparency. We make our data freely available to comparison websites and indeed to others.
Okay. All right, I think that's so that's fairly clear. The websites are self-funding, but they get the data from you. Okay? And self-funding and profit-making organisations. Matthew?
Hopefully. That's the
dream.
intention.
That's the dream.
Okay. And I should add, they get some of some of the data from us. I'm sure that Matthew has other sources as well.
Yeah, we're sat on 17,000 data points of what law firms have entered into our platform.
Okay. All right. Now we have the gentleman down the front. Yep.
Yes, Assam Khan, Cube Law Solicitors. I just wanted to know which other professions really provide information about complaints, because I can't think of architects, accountants, banks, where you go on and it lists all their complaints.
Yep, good question, really good question.
So I was just thinking, why was that so important for solicitors to do that?
Okay, who else does it? Jane?
So perhaps we should draw the distinction between individuals and entities. I know, terrible jargon word, but law firms. So if you look at Ofgem or any of the other markets, then they're publishing complaints information about the firms, about the providers of the services. And I think that's absolutely what we're talking about. So when we're talking about insurance and so on, we're talking about claims against the firms. It's absolutely routine for professional registers. So, for example, the registers of the General Dental Council, for example, would carry what one might loosely call disciplinary information, information about qualifications, all of that type of material. But the complaints material tends to sit against the entity, and that's what we're talking about. And you'll see at the end of our paper, we've actually done a piece of work where we've looked across a huge range of other regulators and looked at the type of information that they collect and publish. And it's really interesting to see the range.
So the idea is it will not be specific to an individual within the entity. It won't be about a particular partner or a particular... What if there is a disciplinary finding against that individual?
So disciplinary findings, findings that have come to the regulator, and it's a discussion paper, but those would be against the individual, where they are indeed disciplinary action against the individual. And we do, of course, publish that at the moment through our solicitor check tool on the website. And people can, of course, also look at the Solicitors Disciplinary Tribunal, where all the detail of the determinations are published. So this is not new information. This is about making it easier for people to access.
Okay. All right. Maybe time for one very, very quick final question. I'm afraid time is getting ahead of us again. Gentleman with his hand up there in the sort of centre of the room. Was I imagining a hand there? Okay, let's have another hand. The lady just sitting about 4 rows up in the aisle. Do you want to stand up and say it? If people can't hear, I'll repeat it. Oh, hang on. Mike is just out with you there. Okay.
Michaela Hardwick from Beyond Compliance. My concern is how, if the SRA go ahead and allow this data to be published, how is that going to help consumers, given that we're faced with regulated and unregulated legal service providers?
Okay, that's a really good question. I mean, we could probably spend an hour talking about that, but I'm going to give you all about a minute. So we'll start. Michelle, should we start with you on that?
Well, it's all about broadening choice, and legal services is an ecosystem. It comprises both, and clearly I think from the solicitor profession perspective, being able to provide this additional information makes it more attractive. We need to encourage consumers to shop around, and I think providing information they need at the right time and in the right manner will encourage them to do so. So I see it as an added value. It allows you to emphasize the benefits that you see in terms of regulation from a consumer perspective, and kind of advertising the package and advertising the brand, so to speak.
Okay. Jen, reserved and unreserved activities?
Absolutely. So as Paul mentioned earlier, as you know, in looking to the future, we'd like to free up, the highly qualified professionals that you all are to work outside of authorised entities. In our discussion paper, one of the suggestions that we're making is that clearly working in an authorised entity carries with it certain protections, access to a compensation fund, for example, that we could look at putting in place a compensation fund logo. You know, this is additional value, just as Michelle has said, that the key thing here is that the consumer, whether small businesses or the public, understand exactly what it is they are buying when they come to you for their services. So that's a real opportunity, as mentioned, to actually say there are these additional protections in place if you choose to go to a particular law firm.
Okay. Look, we really are. I'm really sorry, Matthew. We're running out of time, and I don't want people to miss their break. What's going to happen now is there's going to be a short break between now